Welcome everyone to our webinar series. This is a start of a series hosted by Dairy Australia. My name is Josie Garner. I'm the Development and Regional Adaptation Lead for Feed-Based Nutrition at Dairy Australia. So today we're going to be joined by Dale Gray from Agriculture Victoria. Dale is the seasonal risk agronomist with Agriculture Victoria, where he's worked there for 29 years. Dale provides agronomy, climate change, climate and weather analysis for farmers, agribusiness, government and the media across Southeast Australia. He also authors The Fast Break, which is a climate newsletter, and he produces a monthly YouTube climate update called The Very Fast Break. In 2022, he was the recipient of a Grains Research and Development Corporation Seed of Light Award for Excellence in Grains Industry Communication. So thank you very much for joining us today, Dale, and I'll hand over to you. Oh, sorry, before we do, I just thought I'd let you know, any questions during the webinar are welcome. At the bottom of your screen, you'll have a Q&A button. You just press on that and you can type in your questions. Because this is a webinar, you won't be able to turn your camera on or take yourself off mute to ask questions. Type your questions in and we can read them out during the Q&A session. So please put your questions in there for Dale. So thanks, Dale. I'll hand over to you.
Rightio. Thanks very much, Josie, and good afternoon, everyone, and greetings from Jara country, the ancestral homelands of the Jar Jar Wurrung people here in north central Victoria, where I'm trying to change my slides. There we go. So just looking here at the tale of two halves of the season, really. Up until June, it was particularly wet over, let's say, the broader western half of the state, and particularly in the southwest corner along those coastal dairying areas. And then our central, our central Gippsland dairying region was a bit closer to normal. And then once we left June, well, things generally have dried up. And this is June to October, includes that large October rain, which has really only just normalised the rainfall for a few locations, and a lot of others still remain pretty underdone. So the central Gippsland area there became a bit more, well, average, but all over the shop between some dry months and one wet one. West Gippsland sitting on the fence there at sort of decile 2 to 3. The southwest definitely at decile 1. And the northern areas, average to drier as well. If we just look at where we're sitting for November to date, and I reckon this is about to change in the next week, but we are pretty undercooked. It's been pretty dry so far, and much of the whole western half of the state, including the southwest, has only had 20% of their normal rainfall so far. So there is actually a fair bit of making up of that with only 10 days to go for the month, and probably going to be difficult to do. So suspecting another dry month most likely. Moving to soil moisture now. This is the Bureau's modelled soil moisture. We find that this model works best if you imagine grass, which is good because that's what you people are growing. Doesn't work very well for crop. And we've still got some of those areas, West Gippsland, down into the central there, sitting at average soil moisture for this time of the year. The rest of the state underdone, particularly the southwest, sitting there on this very much below average is decile 1 soil moisture. That's pretty much of the whole western half of the state. And the northern areas, of course, well, with irrigation and things, it's impossible to tell what's going on with those. Our upper Murray areas and some of our upper river valleys are drier as well in terms of their modelled soil moisture. As you may or may not know, Agriculture Victoria has a network of soil moisture probes around the state, and varying in both crops and pastures, both annual and perennial, and in dairying country as well. So we have just generally though, the background image here is the model and shows what percentage of the available plant water is there. And we really can just see that that's kind of, the Central Highlands or east of Melbourne down into West Gippsland is the wettest area as well as the Otways remaining in the state. Other areas are getting, definitely sub 50% in the hills, even though they had that big rain, but everything's sort of kind of used that up, as we'll see. And, our soil probes here are showing red figures, which have decreased greater than 10%, and a lot of those have decreased more than 30%. Certainly some of these ones in Gippsland have returned to the values they were before the big October rain. And they were pretty thankful for that. But if we're just going over here to the southwest ones, very interesting story there. Terang, 77%. We'll explain that soon. And Jancourt and Bessibel both sitting on similar values at sort of really only a third of their soil moisture profile, which I would suspect is not, well, it's far from ideal. It might be close to normal for this time of the year, but it would mean that, pastures are really starting to use that last third of the profile, which is the hardest bit to get, and production and maturity would be kicking in. Production going down, and maturity kicking in as a result of those plants starting to stress for some of their moisture, at least at these two sites here. Interestingly enough, our West Gippsland ones are still sitting on 100%, still wet there, only just coming out of waterlogging even. And we'll be having a look at those probes soon. And our Yarram ones are back to half. And they've had a really rocky ride this year. They were looking at almost as low as 30%, I think, at one stage there in September, came back in October, and are now back down. And such is the nature, as we'll show, of the soil profile in that area. We don't have access in this network to a northern one. We have some northern probes that our northern irrigation team have on irrigation, obviously. Probably the closest thing to an upper river valley is this one here at Greta, where the probe has really gone down dramatically. Probably a month ago, it was close to 100% full, and that's been going down pretty steadily and lost half that profile in the space of 3 to 4 weeks there. I'm just going to go down and just look at a snapshot of Australia generally. This is an NDVI. It's a fancy term for how green things are compared to how green they normally. It's an anomaly, and it's done from space. And it's really just showing, this is an amalgam over the first third of November, really showing how that Gippsland area is sort of sitting at normal. The lemon colour here is normal. And our western areas are now, things basically came in because they all had to finish off on their stored moisture rather than their rainfall. But just looking, and this impacts the marketing, because you can just see how southern Queensland, New South Wales in particular, have had a challenging season, particularly southern Queensland, northern New South Wales, and everything finished off pretty stressed in the Riverina as well. It'll probably still yield all right in the south, but the northern Riverina underdone, just didn't get the moisture that it needed, and didn't get any of that October rain either. You can see really just the effect of that October rain through this area here. South Australia also finished up quite early, and you can see WA as well. So in many respects, Victoria is kind of the shining light for crop production. And I would say pasture production, the eastern part for pasture production, is going better than most other areas around Australia, or has been. This is another thing you may or may not know about. This is the CFA curing map. Comes out every Monday at about 1 o'clock. Comes from satellite imagery, but also has CFA volunteers going out every Sunday and doing some measurements in their own local areas and getting morphed into this map. And it's really just showing the line of curing. And if you're north of the divide like I am at Bendigo, well, it's well and truly cured here. Crops are being harvested, paddocks are burning if they get the opportunity and the light up to do that. And we can see that in the last week, that curing map has really started to get down into the southwest. We have this area in here between Melbourne and Geelong, which has been quite poor for, well, since the end of winter at least. It really has had a failed spring there. It's probably the worst place in the state for pasture and crop production. And what we can see is that Gippsland, which was poor as a result of that rain, has come back. It's greened up in a lot of areas, and they would say thank you for that. What we can see is this, we see curing now starting to come down into the southwest. Just going to compare this to last year. So the pink line is where we're currently at right now. And this was the same time last year. And we can see that, you know, the northeast had only really just started to go off, and pretty much south of the divide had not started to cure at all. If we compare that to 2021, well, the curing line has come down perhaps, you know, to that classic north of the divide area, but the southern areas too had failed. They weren't starting to cure either. So those two previous seasons, as we know, were pretty kind and generous in terms of pasture production in the south. And this year is, particularly in the southwest, that's starting to change a bit earlier than what we'd want and a bit earlier than desired, I would imagine. What I'm going to do here is just go and have a look at a few separate probes. And this one here, we're looking at the Decibel probe. It's only been going since 2021. And this is just the amalgamated data of the sum of the sensors from 10 centimetres down to 8 centimetres, or 0 down to 80 centimetres. There's my cursor. And the black trace shows the moisture level in terms of how much. And the very top of this brown line here is when the plants are unable to get anything more out. We call that the lower limit of pasture extraction out of the profile. And then the blue line up here is when it's deemed to be saturated. When you're above this blue line here, well, it's quite wet indeed. So in the last 3 years there, we can see at Decibel, this is a medium clay soil here. In 2021, the drawdown of the moisture that was accumulated through winter started in first week of November. Was a dry spring, and it just kept going down, down, down. And so in about 6 weeks, that whole profile there has disappeared through November down to after Christmas. Last year, very different kettle of fish. We didn't really start getting drawdown in that profile until the first week of December. And then that went right through into, you know, at least mid-January, I suppose, before things taper down and it gets too warm and it's not, and the pasture's unhappy and it's just sitting there, the perennials just, you know, living but not doing anything. We get to this year, well, this is the earliest we've seen this probe start to deplete, and it's started in mid-September, going down. Had a little bit of a bump there at the start of October and another one there towards the end of October where there was some rain and the plant used water at the surface, which kind of halted the water use. But it's really a case of down, the moisture is down there at the Decibel site. And it's currently, I think we're sitting there, as I said, it was currently sitting at about a third, you know, at the current rate. It's pretty close to cooked, but it's you know, at the current rate there's probably only maybe a couple of weeks, 3 at the most, before that's going to really bottom out at very low levels. This is just the individual traces from the most recent data, where we can see that water use is happening at 10 at the red, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 in the green, nothing really coming out of 80. So the plant's kind of using water at all the depths. And then when we see flat lines here, we know that you know, everything's been completely dried out at that level, but we're not seeing flat line everywhere here. And this green line's not quite the same as here. So it's still got a little bit of moisture left remaining there but it's mainly at depth, which is where it's much harder for those plants to get to. If we move to, now I can't even see my own slides here. I've got to try and get rid of this. How do I get rid of that? I need to hide the floating meeting controls. There we go. So I can see what I'm actually looking at here. We're at Terang now. So Terang, very different soil, heavy black clay soil there. And in the last 3 years, we've had this probe in, started drawdown in December, started drawdown at the start of January last year, and this year it's starting about mid-November. So it's a much later sort of growing paddock, but we can see there back in 2021, this soil type here can burn the whole profile in a month in December. And it would look at the current sort of rate that we're starting to go down, that, you know, there's probably 3 to 4 weeks left there if we're not getting any substantial rainfall. I've said, yeah, probably dry by mid-December if there's nothing available there. Next one is at, why can't that go down? Jancourt. So Jancourt, we've got a much longer data series here, been in since the spring of 2017, where that just drew down, drew all its full profile down over November and December. 2018 certainly started cut out pretty at the end of August, really, just complete drawdown from August, but enough rainfall not to have it really plummeting like it did the year previous. 2019, a lot wetter with moisture right through that spring period, but the drawdown starting in September, started in October in 2020, and really used a half profile really quickly, and then had enough rainfall to hold on. In 2021, now I can't see that because I've got this silly ribbon sitting here, which is very annoying to me. I can't even remember where that was. That's really frustrating for you and for me. I'm certainly last year was, I'm guessing that's around November, December. And this year we're into November here, so that's working backwards. That's November, October. We started drawdown once again in September there here at this site. And just a few, you know, a bit of rain moisture there helping to hold the moisture here at Jancourt through October. But yeah, once again on the way down, and that, you know, paddock there, not much to go there either, and probably gone definitely by the middle of December. We can see that some of these ones here are really starting to get quite low in the middle kind of areas. Still a little bit of moisture left up in the top, but not a lot, and some left down right below, but in the middle starting to sort of start to flat line there, meaning that that crop's not using a lot, or that pasture isn't using a lot. Moving over to Gippsland now, West Gippsland, our paddocks at Longwarry. As I said, that's still sitting at 100%. It's still up in this blue, like it's only just coming out of waterlogging. A lot of this paddock went into waterlogging in about the first week of June, and it's pretty much been there since then. This is a chicory paddock. In 2017, drawdown started in November and got right through until sort of January. In the next year, 2018, started at Christmas time and kind of went through January. So plenty of moisture right through, probably a terrible haymaking year, to be honest, there with all those 19 and 20 mil events. Started in November in 2019, started in November in 2020. And now I can't even see where that was. I'm going to guess it's around November. But generally, it starts in November. This paddock's very much a December. This region is very much a December drawdown, and this year appears to be absolutely no different. And it hangs on this paddock, so it uses water a lot slower, and moisture tends to last sort of from a full profile tends to last 1.5 to 2 months. That's probably the addition of rainfall in a high rainfall area and just the water use of the plant. If we look to a perennial pasture paddock, a ryegrass paddock here at the same farm, once again, it's a December drawdown, certainly can draw down like we saw in 2019, full profile burnt essentially in 4 weeks. So a much quicker user of water, this pasture compared to that chicory one that I showed before. And once again, we're still sitting, had a few issues obviously with this probe with some lost data. But in the previous 2 seasons, but we can see here at the moment, it's still sitting. It's only just coming out of waterlogging there at the moment. moving to our Currumbara, down closer to Leongatha. This one hasn't been going that long either, but it started in, well, drawdown sort of started in October. You can see they get much higher rainfall area, a much jaggeder period there, although we did see water use last year, interestingly enough, after the wet of spring. Saw some pretty good drawdown there over a period of 3 weeks, losing at least half the profile before rainfalls managed to sort of hold things there. Or temperature probably kicked in there and slowed it down. And we can see that that paddock's still sitting up there in the wet at the moment, yet to start its December drawdown. So, you know, good news for those people. They're sitting there on full profiles now, situation normal. And if it doesn't rain much over December, they'll grow a pair of grass there at the moment. Just moving now over to central Gippsland, to Yarram, where this is a really interesting one. This one's been in quite some time. This is a prairie grass paddock, so more dominant, I suppose you would say. But you can see that through 2017 and 18, we weren't even getting a full profile in those 2 years. 2019 we did just, but then it started to come down in September. Pretty early drawdown, I think, in 2021, 2022. I don't even know where that is. That is frustrating the heck out of me. Last year, this year, hopefully you can see the dates down here more than I can. And that's you can see that this year moisture really, only just sort of wet up, really come down to about half full. Then we've got the October rain, and now we're pretty much close to where we were at before that rain, even though some of those areas had 100 mil or more. So fortunately though, for that paddock, it's it's slightly more than half full. So at the current rate that you don't see really rapid water use on this paddock. It's got a longevity to it as well, which must be a sort of a combination of the temperature and the soil type there. Another paddock at Yarram this is a ryegrass, perennial ryegrass paddock. You see some more severe usage of water here perhaps as well. It's usually a September, October drawdown paddock here. So, this area is a more marginal dairying region, and, usually needs supplemental irrigation to pick up on the fact that their profile's not always full in some years. But it can use a whole profile in a month here, this paddock, if it gets the chance. And the warmer those months, we see that in crops. A crop in northern Victoria can use the whole profile in October, and then it's usually finished by November. But as you get a crop or plant in its full growth stage, at the warmer time of the year, it often only takes 4 weeks to go from fully full to fully empty. Rightio, so that's the end of our soil moisture bit. If you're not, there's a network that we have. There's a website. If you want to find out how to get that, you can Google that up or contact me at the details at the end of this talk, or contact some people there at Dairy Australia, and happy to put you off. And you can sort of dial in and look at those individual probes and watch them, which is handy if it's near a location where you are, less handy if it's not, in which case it could be a good idea to get one of your own. Rightio, moving to the climate now. Excuse me. We have our El Nino city, so sea surface temperatures here at the moment. This is the anomaly of sea surface temperature. It's currently about 1.8 degrees warmer out here in the middle of the Pacific. The threshold for an El Nino is 0.8 degrees warmer. So good old-fashioned dinky die El Nino out here. And an amazingly dinky die positive Indian Ocean dipole out in the Indian Ocean. So really warm off Africa, cold water off Sumatra. You'd be struggling to find a more classic pattern of a positive Indian Ocean dipole. And that tends to be the drier two influences on our climate. El Nino from the Pacific Ocean, positive IOD from the Indian Ocean. The problem for these two things is that they took all, excuse me, recovering from a cold which has towed up my lungs. Yeah, these two climate drivers came in quite late in the year. They were predicted to form much earlier and get their act together. That kind of never happened. And for the El Nino, it's still mucking around a bit. So what's interesting is that we still have very normal water up here around Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, the Coral Sea. And historically, when we've had El Ninos, you get this level of blueness, coolness going right around this zone here. And we just haven't seen that. And the rain we had on October, the rain that the East Coast is getting in the next week is all coming out of this zone here because it's not busted. There's nothing wrong up here, which suggests that you kind of can't get moisture out of that area. And that is, to be honest, one of our major, it's probably our major moisture zone is up here where the ocean is evaporating the moisture and it gets dragged down towards us, either straight down in troughs like we're getting this week, or sometimes the moisture moves across and then gets sucked down in a northwest cloud band coming sort of through from the northwest, but the moisture still evolved from out in this region here. Now, the problem with the positive IOD, it's a really strong one, but it started so late that it's probably really going to struggle to hang around for much longer. We would expect a positive IOD to die as soon as the northern wet season starts up here, and the winds will switch around in the Indian Ocean, and very quickly, whatever pattern has been set up here will destabilize. And there's a bit of a mix in the models, I suppose. There's the ones that think that's happening earlier, and the ones that are sort of hanging that through to more a December one now rather than November. But it really does count as when the northern wet season starts to kick in. Now, the trade winds, this is a map of the trade winds or winds in general. The arrows show the direction and the colour scheme show how much stronger that is. And we had been waiting for stronger trade winds in the Western Pacific all year to really embed the El Nino in. And the problem is that's really only just happened in the last month. We see some stronger trade wind activity here, but it's not getting, it's only getting to the date line. Historically, it would get right through to the middle of the Pacific. And the whole thing about those reverse trade winds is that they would make it go cold to the north of Australia by upwelling colder water. And because they haven't been blowing, we haven't had that. So we haven't really seen that strong coupling between the ocean and the atmosphere from this El Nino event that we would normally expect. Where we're seeing amazing coupling is out here in the Indian Ocean, where I've never seen stronger trade winds blowing from Indonesia across to Africa than we see there at the moment. It's quite unbelievable how stronger than normal they are going. Some of those winds there in the order of 30 k's stronger than normal, which is quite an amazing wind anomaly for a month. And that's keeping that water upwelling colder there and pushing it really strongly over to the coast of Africa. I seem to have lost my pointer here. There we go. It's really, and it's holding that warmer water over there that we see in that previous map, and it's not letting it come back. The cloud pattern shows really distinctly what's going on with those ocean patterns underneath us. The real obvious one, climate driver-wise, is the effect that we're seeing there for the positive IOD, just in a massive lack of cloud in brown from Sumatra almost across to Africa, an abundance of cloud off Africa. So it's just a classic positive IOD signal going on there. And so, the moisture stream that you can hope to get out of the Indian Ocean at the moment is absolutely busted in terms of its effect. We've got an abundance of moisture at the international date line. That's what we'd expect for El Nino. But we see it really progressing too far westwards. Normally, we would see this abundance of cloud definitely only getting as far as the Solomon Islands and the very east of PNG, but it's sort of, it's sneaking in over here to the Coral Sea. There's been a kind of a lack of cloud here through the north as well. And that's probably, I imagine that's a phase of the it is almost certainly a phase of the Madden-Julian oscillation we're in, which is the 40-day wave that is the kickoff that kicks off the bursts of the monsoon for the northern wet season. At the moment, it's kind of nowhere to be seen up there at the moment. Probably a good 20 or more days, I suspect, before it's a chance of getting up there and doing something. Pressure patterns. Pressure patterns are interestingly here because we had been under very dominant high pressure sitting over the top of us for early spring. But in the last month, we now see the high pressure sitting off WA coming through to South Australia. And now we're in what I call a trough zone. And that's been moderating our weather from the extremes of what perhaps we might have been thinking we were going to get. There hasn't been a lot of what you'd call really hot weather yet, not certainly extended. It's really been relatively brief if it has. And that's because, yes, we're in this zone here that's streaming in a southwesterly flow into Victoria, which is sort of helping cool things down. And if there is probably a trough line somewhere out here in between this high and this one that's sort of been bringing some of that moisture in down the east coast. In terms of absolute pressure, though, we are still under higher than normal pressure over southern Australia, which means it's putting a bit of downward pressure on things, pulling systems further south. The southwest, I suspect, has not been benefiting from that at all, and there hasn't been for all of spring. And the other thing we see there is some higher pressure at Darwin, normal to higher pressure at Tahiti. And this pressure pattern here is it's only half of what you'd expect for El Nino. Normally in El Nino, yep, higher pressure at Darwin, absolutely. Should be much lower pressure out here in the southern Pacific, south central Pacific. And we saw some of that, but at the moment we don't. At the moment, all we're seeing there is normal to lower pressure. So the SOI is negative 8.4 on the basis of what's going on up here at Darwin. And it looks as though in the last few days, the SOI is actually going a lot more negative of that. So I think probably in the shorter term that we see, probably likely to see that go more negative, which means we'll start to see a bit more coupling up. Because we've got those reverse trade winds going on in the Pacific, I think we probably will see some strengthening in this El Nino event over the coming weeks. It's certainly predicted to get warmer in the Central Pacific, but it's important to dissociate what you'll hear in the media about strength of El Nino and any drying effect that might happen. There is a really poor link between how strong the El Nino event is in terms of how hot it gets in the Central Pacific and any drying that we might get. We've had terrible droughts in absolutely poxy El Ninos, and we've had a relatively weak El Nino at the moment that's sort of been, relatively okay for much of the area of Victoria, and we've perhaps had a few lucky rainfall events there. But we've had everything else in between as well. So it's really more locally how the El Nino pans out in terms of how cold does it get to our northeast. And at the moment, we're just seeing nothing like that going. And we see other things going on as well. So just in summary, the Indian Ocean, 5 ticks out of 5 with everything that you could look at for that for a positive IOD. But over in the El Nino, the ocean to depth, and the winds are probably locked in pretty well, El Nino-like. The pressure pattern's still a bit iffy, and the cloud pattern's still a bit iffy as well, which is what this has been going on now for more than, 4 months or more, I suppose, with the fact that, our ticks in the boxes for El Nino just haven't been there. And that has given me no confidence that the El Nino was going to necessarily come out with the dry result that, perhaps we were expecting. It certainly has been dry in some areas, certainly been dry in lots of areas of eastern Australia. But Victoria, as often happens in El Nino, or can happen, you can sometimes get the opposite happening just with a bit of freak weather. Just changing to another climate driver now, one that particularly over summer affects the eastern half and perhaps the south of the divide and the eastern half of Victoria. The southern annular mode, that measurement of the wind patterns that are spinning around Antarctica, has both positive phases where those winds slow down, winds go faster around Antarctica, and pull the systems away from southern Australia, and has negative phases where that pushes them up. And what's interesting is that in winter, normally a negative southern annular mode is a wetter signal, and a positive annular mode is a drier signal in winter. But when we get to summer, this climate driver completely flips, and we start seeing, as a result of positive southern annular mode, more likely to be wetter as a result of things pulled further south and more easterly flow coming in from the eastern side, or the southeast of Australia, from the Tasman Sea. But it's also an effect along the south there as well. So at the moment, the southern annular mode is weekly negative. It's predicted by the American Bureau to jump back up to normality and sort of go down to negative a bit again. It's predicted by the Australian Bureau to just come back to normal and just sit completely on the fence for the next sort of 14 days. So this climate driver doesn't have great predictability, tends to be quite erratic, is often more interesting to look back in retrospect and see what's gone on. Interestingly enough, the first week of October was a moderately strong positive burst, which really matched up with that rain event that came through. Now, what's interesting with this climate driver, has got two things in play here, is that when we've got an El Nino over summer, we would normally expect a negative SAM to correlate with that, which would normally be a drier, warmer signal, kind of exact opposite of what you expect from this pattern. But because of the Tongan volcano, I won't try to pronounce it because I'll kill it totally. Won't do its four-word name justice. But because of that volcano in January of last year that put so much water vapor into the atmosphere, and particularly the southern hemisphere, gave us a positive SAM last summer, helped to moderate the temperatures over summer. There's still the possibility that that is still hanging around. And I think climatologists and the models, when we look at the model outcomes, we can see both of these scenarios coming out in some models. So I think there's a great uncertainty about what this climate driver is going to do over summer. Which brings us to climate models. I just crunched them all this morning. So you're seeing it here first. This is a scoop. We've got two models that are yet to clock over for their November runs. So just they're the October runs for them. We're looking at predictions for December, January, February. So for summer, and model skill starts to slip now after we're leaving spring. And we see some moderate skill, but we see low, particularly in the western half of the state and the southwest. We have every model predicting the El Nino to keep going, although this one here is backing it off a bit quicker. It's the only one that is. Others all keeping it going for the next 3 months. I might think that's an error, actually. I'll have a look at the next slide that comes through. I'm not convinced that that is right. But we can see most models, well, a number of models keeping the positive IOD going. One of them bringing in warm quite quickly, and some of them breaking it down, and that pattern is really, really quite weak. So there's really a split there between the models sort of keeping a stronger positive IOD going over summer, which is quite unusual. I don't see that very often. What data we have suggests that, 1 over December might keep those drier signals going a bit longer. But what's interesting is when we look at the rainfall signals, is that where last month the majority of our models were all sitting at the drier end because they were predicting a drier November, now we get to summer, a vast number of models are completely sitting on the fence at this neutral forecast, which is a third chance of wet, a third chance of average, and a third chance of dry. It doesn't mean plan for average, it means plan for anything, the neutral forecast. There are, however, as I said, a few drier eastern half of Victoria signals, which would, for my money, sniff of a bit of negative SAM in some of those. But we see some here with some wetter signals for Far East Gippsland, which at the very least would be sort of sniffing a bit of positive, Sam. But generally, as a whole, though, the majority of things sitting on the fence coming back from the dries of the seasonal outlooks in the previous 6 months are now just sitting on the fence, which is more normal when there's nothing going on. And as we'll see soon, it's also normal for El Nino years. You might be surprised to hear that. I hear a lot of frustrating stuff around about the long, hot, dry summer we're expecting. But historically in El Nino years in Victoria, the rainfall has been all over the shop. And we'll see some stuff soon about that. What is not over the shop, though, is the temperature predictions, which are for warmer, and that is absolutely typical for an El Nino over summer. It's also typical for the positive IOD as well. So warmer temperatures, and how that plans out in terms of really hot or just a bit hotter is uncertain. The models don't give us great resolution, I suppose, about what you'd call heat shocks or heat spikes. That's very much weather driven that tends to do that. If we look at the real crystal ball gazing out to autumn, which is worth 4/5 of nothing from the models at this time of the year. Who would know what is going to happen in autumn? I certainly don't. The models certainly don't, because they have come back to sit on the fence at neutral. That is normal. We've got a few keepy things drier out there. We've got a few a bit wetter. So once again, still looking a bit sort of negative Samish. We've got most of them sitting on the fence, which would be absolutely normal. What you can see is that the vast, that was almost certainly an error back before, sorry. The Europeans aren't knocking their El Nino off and then bringing it back. Should have been one to start with. Everyone's keeping this El Nino going into autumn next year, where it will break down. It absolutely will break down in autumn. That's just the normal time the Pacific Ocean happens. But in terms of, it's really a case of, well, big deal, who cares? That is not likely to be a very strong driver of the climate in Victoria over summer and into autumn as that thing breaks down. What we can see is that the Indian Ocean absolutely is predicted to have broken down and warmed up. So, does that mean we see a few more cyclones in the Timor Sea, some breakdowns of those coming down through the centre? I don't know. But if the ocean's warmer up there, it stands a chance of that happening. Well, the warmer signals keep going as because of that El Nino is still up there happening too. So I think this might be my last slide here. Just looking at the last 6 El Nino years or summers, El Nino summers, I can see 63, 64, 72, 73, 82, 83. I know, I reckon that's 2015, 16. 2015 was our last proper El Nino. And if we just looked at Victoria, a drier signal in that one, a wetter signal, quite strong. There must have been at least a couple of events that came down from the northwest in that summer. 82, 83 stayed dry from the terrible drought of the spring before. A bit mixed in whatever year that is. 94, 95 maybe. And in here, average to drier, sitting on the fence there in 2015, 16. If someone wanted me to bet my house on where would be drier, absolutely, with a summer El Nino, the one location I would pick is the very top of Cape York. That's the one that nearly always sticks out as being drier. But everywhere else, even Queensland for that matter, in El Nino summers, have been all over the shop, which I think is good news for them. I think it's probably a lot of people looking at that rain coming down at the moment going, what is going on? What is happening? How can this be occurring? Well, it's not quite summer yet, so it could certainly occur in summer. But the fact that that Coral Sea is still sitting up there doing a relatively normal thing is really what's driving that at the moment. So I think, I was going to talk briefly in the last little bit of time just about heat stress and in particular monitoring of that and predictions of that. I know the old Keystone product that was done by Dairy Australia doesn't exist anymore. And there really literally isn't a heat stress thing available out at the moment. Of course, just in summation there, realising that heat stress is a combination of temperature and humidity. I'm sure you're only too aware of that. High solar radiation, low wind speed, and the animals are unable to cool themselves down. And in particular, needing a lower night temperature for recovery if they can get that. It's measured using a thing called the thermal heat index. When we get numbers in the low 70s, that's where we start getting concerned. And if it's in the 80s, well, that's definitely up in the don't like to see that range. So I have got access to an experimental product here. This is the Bureau of Meteorology's thermal heat index prediction product. This is being worked on by the Northern Australian beef industry at the moment. And to be honest, I don't know if and when it will become operational. Certainly hopeful it will become operational. A number of other things became operational in the last 2 years as a result of a project, the Forewarned Forearm project that Dairy Australia was involved in, as well as a whole heap of other industry RDCs. But this one, it wasn't one of the 4 products that was deemed to come out. It's hopefully going to come out in another iteration. But what we see here, I think I've predicted a high thermal index, so over the 78. This is the prediction for the 26th, so late this week into next week. And we can see the chances of a couple of days getting into the higher thermal heat index there in the northwest, and particularly in the and just creeping into the Murray irrigation area there. And then we've got, I think, I need to move that around. This is a prediction just for December as a whole. You can see, perhaps unsurprisingly, a total number of days creeping in there. It's interesting to look at this because we are expecting warmer temperatures, but are we expecting humid and less wind as well? I suppose this product is helping to look at that spatially. And this, so it's currently a product for both weeks and months. So hopefully we see that at some stage. This is just once again severe. This is for what was the one I was looking back there? That was December. And now we're looking at so that was high. This is severe. So this is really looking at the nasty stuff. And that's just for December. So nothing predicted there for south of the divide, which I suppose is good news. But January starts to pick up one day, or not one day, a couple of days sneaking in there potentially as well. But once again, that's a long way out. You will know what chance you normally, I imagine, get heat stress days in the south. And be interested to know whether, having a couple at all in January would be atypical or not. The only other way we can look at this thing at the moment from the bureaus is looking at their forecast of maximum temperature, and in particular looking at that where it's in the chance of being in the highest 20%. So when you go into the bureau's climate forecast maps now, you can just click on any location to get a locational thing, but you can also down the side, you can look at all these other things, of which the chance of extremes is one of them. So you can look at the maximum and the minimum temperature and the chance of an extreme. And an extreme in this is defined as a temperature in terms of maximum in decile 9 and 10. So the top 20% of records. And for that period of late this week into next week, there is a prediction of some much warmer than normal temperature likely, like twice the normal chance of a warmer than normal temperature in the southwest. Now, I'm not saying that's going to be a thermal heat shock event because we're only in late November, early December. I don't think that's what that's saying. But it is chances that you'll be experiencing warmer than normal temperatures. If you've got hay on the ground, hopefully that means that it'll be good curing weather. I think that's what I would be reading more into that forecast. And then the forecast for December just shows that there's very much a chance of warmer than normal temperatures in decile 9 and 10 for maximums over much of the northern part of the state, but not disappearing everywhere else as well. I think we've got almost 50 to 60, almost 3 times the normal chance of getting temperatures in the top 20% of records. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. It'll be the high pressure patterns where they sit as to how that plays out. If we get them sitting out in the Tasman Sea, drifting that hot northerly wind into us, that's when the game will be on. So just in summation there, that El Nino, it's still mucking around. It's been mucking around for many months. It's possibly strengthening at the moment. It's predicted to hang around into autumn, but it really a case is probably who cares. It's done its dash. Spring is over, and it's not to say that we can't have dry El Ninos, but the problem is for every dry one we've also had wet ones as well. So it's really a case of plan for anything in the coming months, and the models also kind of show that too in terms of plan for anything for rainfall, but certainly warmer the more likely too. The positive IOD, absolute fair dinkum one there at the moment. Die. It keeps predicting to die later than what we were expecting. And the latest info is that, it could still have some effect into December in terms of warmer and drier if it doesn't break down as quick as we would like. So that's it from me, Josie. I will take it back to the central commentary position, and there's the details there if you want to join our podcast newsletter YouTubes. Just punch those into Google really is sometimes the easiest way of finding it, or sending us an email at the break.
Thanks, Dale. It's a great presentation. I've got a couple of questions in the chat.
Cool.
While you're waiting, if anyone else has any questions, please type them into the Q&A box now. So I'm going to read out a question from Peter Gaffey. He says, great presentation, Dale. In the past, you have presented pie charts with the likelihood of drier than average and wetter than average in different towns using historical weather data. Are these still available?
Yes, so that comes off our local climate tool. If you just typed in local climate tool, Agriculture Victoria, you can get that. The only problem with that product is that it works during the growing season. And as soon as you try to go December, January, it doesn't work. So you can really only look at your correlations in the current year. But you're right, Peter's right, you can go into that and torture the data set as to what the Indian Ocean Dipole and ENSO, El Nino, La Nina have done for your location historically, and look at any suite, look at winter, spring, summer, autumn if you're interested, although you'll see nothing there. But when I have done something similar manually on an Excel spreadsheet, El Nino summers this time of the year really just plot out a third wet, a third average, a third dry, much the same as those 6 graphs I showed you for the most recent 6 events. But that's a good Dorothy Dixon question there, Peter. Good to bring up we love our local climate tool for analysing data. And it's really the truth teller. When you're hearing what's going on, it's always good to, let's look at historically what's happened. And often it's not as bad as what you might be imagining.
Thanks, Dale. Hopefully that answered your question, Peter. Got a question from Rodrigo. He said, thanks, Dale. Any insights on current or expected effects from El Nino in other countries and potential impacts on farm inputs or commodities?
Oh, gee, that is a good question. Let me go back to here. Rightio. So if El Nino historically dries off Eastern Australia, all this warm water over in this region tends to has effects on North America, particularly the southern half of North America. It almost certainly has impacts in Central America and the northern half of South America as well. The one thing you can see from that map at the moment, though, is that the world's ocean is warm. It is warmer than normal by almost a degree or more on average there. Very few areas of cooler, which is why we are expecting a warmer year this year, because all that heat in that ocean has to come into the atmosphere at some time. It will, and that will be keeping the atmosphere warm. And we often see spike warm years against the background of warming. They really manifest themselves when we get these El Nino years putting their heat back into the atmosphere. So there's a little aside there. It might be better if we go into the cloud chart, where we can see Central America is kind of cloudy at the moment. Generally, Indonesia, that while the IOD's on, that's really quite drying for them. West Africa tends to be incredibly wetter and stormier when the positive IOD is happening too. So these things don't just affect us, they absolutely have effects on other parts. But in terms of key dairying areas, fortunately or not, New Zealand doesn't have a very strong correlation with El Nino, La Nina at all, or the positive IOD. It'd probably be driven more from that southern annular mode kind of stuff. North America, as I said, often has a wetter time of things. And obviously in there, it's their winter period coming in now, but it would have normally been something for their autumn period. So our spring, their fall period in terms of extra rainfall, perhaps rather than necessarily summer, but just those heat effects are certainly likely. But in terms of inputs, I think beyond my knowledge level, I think Rodrigo, in terms of where phosphorus and urea are coming from. I suppose as North America has a boom. Europe, these climate drivers tend to not affect Europe at all. So it's very much more Asia and closer to us, Asia, West Africa, and also the central and northern and north of Southern America. That's not a great answer, I'm sorry, but partially helpful, I hope.
Thanks, Dale. I don't have any other questions in the chat, but I do have one. In the coming months, what should we be looking for in terms of the climate drivers to keep an eye out on?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, Josie. As I said, the El Nino might be there, but I don't think I'd be really interested in that at the moment. And the positive IOD will disappear sometime soon. It will cease to be the influence. Both those things are very much winter, spring rainfall killers in Southern Australia. So we start to being influenced by other things, and it will be that southern annular mode. I think that will be interesting to see what that gets up to. Does it? Which of these two things wins? Will it be negative? Will it be positive? Will it sit on the fence? I think I suggested that the models don't really show what they think is going to go on there either. The other thing that will drive summer is really the pressure patterns. So at the moment, things are being moderated by this predominant southwesterly across the state, but that will not stay like that. Will change. Either we'll get the big high sitting over the top of us, which will lead to drier conditions, not necessarily hotter, but just drier, because everything will get pushed away from those highs. What we're perhaps not wanting to see is when we get the high sitting here and the high sitting in the Tasman, and then we're in that trough line of the northerlies. Now, that can bring tropical moisture in as well, but it can also feed those really warm, dry air in from the centre of Australia as well. So it's really, once we get to summer, it'll be a story of what's happening to the south rather than looking where we've been up to the north. And that will go right through until autumn. This time of the year is not our best predictability. Autumn is our worst predictability from the models, because all those northern oceans will be reset in autumn, and we have no idea which way they're going to go. We might have some inclination, and we had that inclination early this year in February and March that the ocean might want it to go El Nino-like, but gee, it took a long time to do that. And for most of the season, we weren't being influenced by El Nino because, really incredibly late formation of that. We were really being influenced by the pressure patterns sitting over the top of us rather than El Nino. And the southern annular mode mucking us around a bit too during winter. So that autumn period, there'll be no shortage of forecasts coming out in autumn. You really should just block your ears and deal with the known knowns, the things that you actually know. Have you had an autumn break or not? What are your feed supplies in terms of stored feed on hand? And how are your water supplies? How are they holding up? They're the three things that you can measure and know and act upon. And soil moisture, to some extent, might have an influence as well in terms of how much you've got stored underneath there. And whether if you got an opening rain, you might get a good autumn flush, or you actually may not. There's nothing there, it's bone dry. I think it'd be interesting to see. I think a lot of our perennial paddocks are probably going to bone dry out in the southwest. But interesting to see what happens with this rain that goes on over summer, whether we see a bit more stuff in the eastern half of the state and constantly topping those things up. Anyway, I'm rambling on, Josie. Sorry.
No, that's great. Thanks, Dale. That was very interesting. If there's no more questions, you can screenshot the last slide, and you can contact Dale if you've got any questions, but we might wrap up the webinar there. So thanks for joining us today.
Rightio, no worries. Thank you. I might just put that through to my last slide just to hold it there for a bit longer. And yeah, well, sincerely, all the best, everyone. All the best for the rest of the season, and for the people in the north, the season just starting, really.